The Heisman Trophy results are in, and Cam Ward absolutely deserved better.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
But no matter how they tallied the votes, it does not take away from an incredible season and all the memories that Cam Ward has made in a Miami uniform and will continue to make, because we get to watch QB1 one more time in the Pop-Tarts Bowl in Orlando. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC, and writer for Canes County at Rivals. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Joining me to vent a little bit, but we're also going to be talking about a number of different things, folks. We're going to talk about the latest on the transfer portal because Miami has some new visitors locked in, some players that now consider Miami to be a finalist, top 5 in their transfer portal hunt. We're going to talk about clown stuff, guys. The new GM of the North Carolina Tar Heels is randomly taking shots at Mario Cristobal. We will not tolerate this. Our guy D-Train, Dennis Smith, is already not tolerating it. We're going to talk about these Heisman results with our very good friend, former Sebastian the Ibis, great friend of the show, Rudy Tomarchio is with us. So, Rudy, I wasn't expecting Cam Ward to win the Heisman. I don't think you were either. But to only get 6 first-place votes and only 3 more first-place votes than a guy who wasn't even invited to the ceremony, to me, that's disrespect.
Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of Cam Scatterbo from Arizona State, but you're not invited and you still get nearly as many votes as Cam Ward did. Like, I think the biggest insult there was just the 6 first place votes. And you see like the majority of them going to Ashton Genty and obviously to the winner, Travis Hunter. But yeah. I mean, you're talking about, you outperformed Dylan Gabriel, the other quarterback in the Heisman finalist list in every statistical category imaginable. You have arguably the biggest impact on your team because we didn't see Cam Ward have a bad game. His quiet games were 300 passing yards. So yeah, it's kind of insulting for a Miami, not for a Miami player, but for a guy like Cam Ward and his character, because look, say what you want about Travis Hunter's year. It's cool to see a guy play 2 ways, even though his stats aren't really exemplary in any of either position he's playing in. But in terms of having like that, this is kind of a wild year because it's turned the Heisman like voting on its head in terms of like, they usually look for a guy who's like the ultimate team player who like makes big plays, who's always really encouraging of his teammates. And like, look, Travis Hunter is not a toxic teammate by any means, but when you look at Heisman moments, is it him throwing up the Heisman pose in a loss in Lawrence, Kansas?
That's right. And he threw up the pose, so it's a Heisman moment.
Threw up the pose, went to College game day on like a week off. You know, Colorado lost 3 games and a couple of them when he was hurt. Like, what, did you want Cam Ward to like sit out and, you know, have an injury and then make that look like he's a bigger case of how important he is to Miami? I don't know. I just think a guy that elevates your entire team like Cam Ward did offensively, he obviously didn't elevate the defense any, except for maybe a couple of key like moments and crazy comebacks. Like, who's orchestrated a comeback from further back this year than Cam Ward has? I don't think anyone's done it.
No. And this is what bothers a lot of people. Now, first of all, how does Cam Ward wins the O'Brien Award, which is given out to the most outstanding quarterback, and yet he finishes behind another quarterback in the Heisman voting? Make that make sense. You can't, outside of the fact that different people vote on those awards. So obviously, you know, the people who vote on the quarterback only award seem to have different values here. But you look at this graphic, and for those who are listening to the audio version, I'll describe it. So games played this year, Cam Ward 12, Dylan Gabriel 13. Cam finished behind Dylan Gabriel in the Heisman voting, by the way. Passing yardage, Cam Ward over 4,100 yards. Dylan Gabriel, 3,500 yards. Rushing yards, Cam Ward, 196. Dylan Gabriel, 192. Total touchdowns, Cam Ward, 41. Dylan Gabriel, 35. Games with 3+ total touchdowns, 3 or more. Cam Ward had 10 of those games. Dylan Gabriel had 8. Now, clearly the Heisman committee, and I guess it's their right to do so, wanted to, reward the guy who has a better team, number one seed, undefeated in the college football playoff and all that. I mean, sometimes they tend to vote that way, but if you look at the Heisman winner from last year, it doesn't always go to just, the more votes don't always go to the quarterback of the better team, because Cam Ward, no question, Rudy, had a better season than Dylan Gabriel.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. Like, look, I know Ken Dorsey won the Davey O'Brien Award, and he didn't win the Heisman, obviously. And then they had him and Willis McGahee in 2002 to split the votes. They finished 4th and 5th. Rarely do you see 5 players invited. Given the number of votes that Cam Scadaboo had, maybe he should have had a trip to New York, to do a little sightseeing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it goes back to yes, there's a Miami bias, of course. I think if you look at Miami's 2 Heisman Trophy winners, you have to be undefeated in the regular season to even be, a more of a legitimate contender. And that's, I'm talking about rules that only apply to Miami, because look, the 2 Miami Heisman Trophy winners, Vinny Testaverde, Gino Torretta. Vinny had one of the best years of a quarterback in that era. And then obviously we know what happened with Penn State and all that. And then, Gino Torretta, Miami running the table in 1991. So it's like, hey, this is what you expect. I hate to say that the defense cost Cam Ward a Heisman, but if you have maybe one less loss, maybe they have one more comeback, or hell, 2 more comebacks, because at that point you would have also played the ACC championship game. Likely you win the Heisman in that situation.
Now, all this to say, we're not going to let the results of a subjective award change what Cam Ward has done here at Miami. And yeah, like you said, it's disappointing that, hey, the defense probably cost him a Heisman, and unfortunately the defense cost us a trip to the ACC championship game and possibly a college football playoff. But, Rudy, I was actually yesterday with my son, Luca, and he wanted to keep watching this over and over again. We were watching the ACC put together a montage of every touchdown, all 41 of them, that Cam Ward scored through the air and on the ground this year. And we probably watched the video 4 or 5 times consecutive on loop. And I don't want to forget, and I will never forget, because, there have been plenty of years, Rudy. This year, we're complaining about the defense not holding up their end of the bargain. How many times over the years has Miami had a really good defense, but an offense that just couldn't score their way out of a paper bag, including last year, the defense was pretty good and the offense was committing turnovers left and right. So I appreciate what we have right now. Despite the fact that Miami fell short of our ultimate goals, I am going to remember this offense that could score at will against just about anybody that they face this year, and Cam Ward being the conductor of that orchestra. You cannot take that away from us. Thank you so much, Cam Ward.
Absolutely. And at the same time, too, now because you finally had a really good offense for the first time in a long time, you know what the bar is. You're probably never going to get back to those heights again, because that's a historic offense. I mean, that's the best offense in college football. In terms of what you look at for quarterback play, like, I don't think there's a guy that's going to come around that's anything like Cam Ward. So to say, like, now we remember in a recent basis, what's the knock on Miami fans? We keep living in the past. Stop looking at Ken Dorsey. Stop looking at those offenses. That's not what football is now. Okay, cool. Now we've had a number 1 overall statistical offense in college football. We know what to look for again, which is great to see. But at the same time, too, I think the impact that Cam Ward's had on Miami is going to last over multiple years, because how can you not learn from a guy like Cam Ward sitting in that same film room, talking offense, understanding like how the play breaks down and what you can do to make yourself available, because you can never give up on a play. That should be something that, from a leadership perspective, should, last with Miami for at least a couple of seasons. So I'm looking forward to see like what the quarterback room does with a guy like Emory Williams there, who has obviously learned under Cam this year. Some of the other offensive players that are sticking around, it should only help Miami.
I mean, with a guy like Emory Williams, and I like Emory, it may not necessarily be Emory, because I do think Miami would have their eyes on a certain Washington State quarterback, not the one we have right now. The next one, John Mateer, if he becomes available. But folks, we have a lot more to get to on this episode of Locked On Canes. Got to talk about the GM of the North Carolina Tar Heels just throwing strays at Mario Cristobal. Has been on the job 3 days. He's talking trash about Coach Cristobal. We'll get to that. But coming up next, we got to talk some transfer portal. Miami's got visits upcoming, more of them today. We're going to be hosting a Nebraska linebacker. Miami's been hosting a ton of receivers. I mean, receivers saw the numbers that our guys were putting up this past season. They all want to be part of this. What about defensive backs? Miami's working on DBs as well. You want to keep it locked right here, my friends. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. And folks, we are only getting started with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Get ready to tackle all the NFL action today and Monday with FanDuel, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more right on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with that $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you for making this special Sunday episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Rudy, before we talk about transfer players at other positions, I'd like your take on quarterback, because Miami right now, they're being very measured. Like, they're not bringing in quarterbacks for visits. There have been certain quarterbacks we thought they might go after that they never called. Like Fernando Mendoza from Cal. Miami seemingly was not interested. Darian Mensah, who ended up at Duke, Miami never called him. A lot of people are wondering if they could be waiting on John Mateer from Washington State, who's widely expected to enter the transfer portal, but hasn't. I feel like Mateer is an upgrade for most of the teams in the country that are looking for quarterbacks, but how do you feel about this situation? Do you want Emery to get the shot because this is a guy Miami has developed, or do you think the Hurricanes should be open for potential upgrades?
Look, if we go after Mateer, can we sign some sort of like an understanding agreement with Washington State that they're now like a feeder program directly for us or something? Like, at this point, the way you're going to tier out college football, there's going to be developmental programs, and I feel like the Cougars over there are kind of becoming one for Miami if this actually happens. In terms of, do I want him or do I want Emory Williams to get his chance? I want them to at least compete, because you should go after the best talent every single year. Yeah. Yes, Emory is prepared. Yes, Emory has proven himself last year. Granted, he didn't have like full control of the offense, but really nobody outside of Cam Ward has had full control of this offense. So I think there's an argument to be made for both, but hey, if he wants to come here and compete, unless you get some sort of generational talent like Cam Ward, which I don't believe is available in the transfer portal this year, you can't guarantee somebody a starting position. You can offer them the opportunity to compete, and that obviously may, affect your chances of going after a quarterback in the portal already, because if you're in there, you want to go to a guaranteed starting job. Yeah. Like you mentioned Mensah. Okay, well, Malik Murphy's no longer at Duke. That quarterback room's pretty empty. You can obviously guarantee a guy like that saying you're going to be starting for us next season. But can you do that for Miami right now? Unless there's somebody else like Cam out there, I don't think you can. And as good as he's looked at Washington State, I'm not the big evaluator of talent here. I will trust Miami's coaching staff in that department. Seems like they hit a home run last year. I expect them to kind of do the same. I think let them compete.
You're so right about Washington State, and I start to see some of their fans are getting salty. Got a couple of YouTube comments because in one of our recent episodes, we talked about the John Mateer portal hype, and I was actually prompted by an article from an Oklahoma insider on 24/7 Sports who expects Miami and Oklahoma to compete if and when he hits the portal. There's people who are on social media posting about that article, and I see these comments on my channels and others from Washington State fans are like, hey, you dummies, you're tampering. Well, why don't Oklahoma and Miami, why don't you develop your own quarterbacks? And then somebody hit this guy with a great comment that said, well, didn't you get Cam Ward from another team? They got him from Incarnate Word. So, yep. I mean, I feel bad for Washington State fans, but the reality is when you're in the Tupac or whatever it is now, they're adding teams to the Pac-12, but it's a bunch of G5 teams. You're not really in a power conference anymore. And, Washington State, they don't have the NIL resources the Power 4 teams have. This is just your life, man. You're going to become a feeder program to schools like Oklahoma and Miami and so on. So that's just unfortunate for them. Looking at some other stuff in the transfer portal, We're definitely not getting Dylan Thieneman, the safety from Purdue, because he's going to Oregon. We were never, unfortunately, for whatever reason, we were never really in it for Thieneman. Here is our guy, D Money at Canes Insight, wrote about a few defensive backs. Ethan O'Connor from Washington State. We're interested in him. Emmanuel Carnley from Arizona. That's a big cornerback. These are both cornerbacks. Carnley is visiting now. He's on campus this weekend. There's other cornerback targets Miami is looking at. It's safety, Zechariah Poyser, who I think is a really good player out of Jacksonville State, Adrian Wilson of Washington State. So Miami is looking at some safeties and some defensive backs because, Rudy, that's the area Miami needs most. Now, you look at what's happening out there, it's like wide receivers are lining up to come to Miami because of, the year Miami just had in the passing game. It's been a little bit more difficult to identify the top defensive targets, probably because of the year Miami just had on D.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing to touch about on Washington State again, too, in terms of transfer portal, maybe we need to try to find whoever's doing their evaluation for quarterback talent, because they seem to not miss either. So if we could just bring him, there's no more criticism of Miami taking Washington State's players. Like, cool, we'll just take your coach then that does all the talent scouting, and then we don't have to worry about taking your players anymore. In terms of the guys in the portal right now, like, look, I've never been a big fan of Nebraska and the vaunted black shirt defense, but if we could take somebody from there and they have team speed, happy to do it. I'm more excited to hear about who the defensive backs are coming in, because that's really, for me, that's the point of largest improvement. And look, I love our corners. I think a healthy Damari Brown and obviously OJ Frederick with another year is going to look great, but we need all the safety help that we can get. So if we can grab a couple of talents out of that, obviously Thieneman going to Oregon hurts. I don't know if he was really ever in the running with Miami, but we need all the help we can get. If there's depth competition, happy to hear that receivers are lining up. I'm really happy with the receivers that Miami has. I mean, I think Isaiah Horton had a great year last year. I don't know if there's any development with Sam Brown or whether he's declaring or not. I'd love to see him come back.
Yeah, we don't know.
I'd love to see him stay and come back.
He should come back, but apparently he's 50-50 on declaring.
And then, Nikar, JoJo Trader, like there's guys back there that I want to see, get some more reps too. So in terms of if they're recruiting anybody, hopefully they're getting some size. I think we could use a little bit of that. And you also mentioned Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech. As much as schematically he may not be the best fit for what Miami's offense looks like right now, I'm happy to take a guy that's competed against that Georgia Tech secondary, because that's one of those games where we struggled. Not so much because I think the coverage was great. I just think that they played more physically and they were allowed to play physically in that game. Because if you remember Isaiah Horton, there's a couple of deep routes where his jersey is completely off his shoulder and they didn't throw a flag on those plays. Okay, if you need to be more physical in terms of getting separation from your defensive backs, I know Singleton's done that every day in practice against that secondary. I'll gladly take that along with maybe a little bit of knowledge about what Georgia Tech does defensively to help you in competition. Granted, I don't think Miami plays Georgia Tech for the next 2 seasons in the ACC, right?
By the way, we don't play North Carolina next year, do we? I'd love to, but I don't think we do.
I would like to as well.
Yeah. All right. So going back to Eric Singleton, you mentioned the Georgia Tech receiver who's in the portal. He is going to be visiting Miami as well. Miami is a finalist for him, along with Auburn, LSU, Texas, and Ole Miss. So it's all SEC plus Miami. 56 catches for 745 yards and 3 touchdowns with Georgia Tech this year. Also rushed for 131 yards on 21 carries. So Singleton is strongly considering Miami. He's going to be visiting. Miami has hosted this weekend. I think the visit is still ongoing with Eric Rivers from FIU, who is their record-setting all-time single-season leader in yards this past year. Even T.Y. Hilton never had as many yards receiving as Eric Rivers. Yeah, which my mind is blown by that one as well. Miami, CJ Daniels from LSU has also shown interest in Miami. He's visiting as well. And there's a former Washington State, but most recently an Oklahoma State receiver, Dejon Stribling, who is 6'2", 202 pounds. He, in his career, 2 seasons at Washington State, I think this was his first 2 years at Washington State, 2,153 receiving yards, 17 touchdowns. I think that's his career numbers actually total. 161 career receptions this past season. He caught 52 passes for 882 yards and 6 touchdowns. So as mentioned, Rudy, Miami has several wide receivers interested. And you know what? Whoever the quarterback is, Emory Williams, whoever it is, they're going to benefit not only, like you said, from the talent that they have in the room, but the talent that's going to be visiting.
Mm-hmm. Hey, easy to throw when they're open. So if they know how to get open in space, if they know how to deal with physical coverage, and obviously not getting some calls your way, I'll happily take them.
Yeah, I mentioned a linebacker from Nebraska who's visiting. I think his visit is starting today, Sunday. Mekhi Bayer. It's spelled very strangely, Gbayor, but it's pronounced Bayer. He's visiting right now. 6'2", 230-pound linebacker. This dude is a load. 73 tackles, 9 tackles for loss over the past 2 years. He's got an excellent run stopping grade according to Pro Football Focus, 80.9. 10% missed tackle rate over 2 seasons. Shout out to the guys at Inside the U for posting those stats there for Mekhi Bayer. So that's one who's going to be visiting as well. When we come back, though, I want to talk about the new GM, another one of these old heads who's joining Bill Belichick's staff. You've probably seen this guy on TV before. You've probably followed his NFL career a little bit, but Michael Lombardi, he's the new GM of the North Carolina Tar Heels program. Listen, I wish him all the best up there in Chapel Hill, but my man, you're on the job for a couple of days. You're already taking random pot shots at Mario Cristobal. I just wonder why. You want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Folks, we are so excited to welcome in the CFP here to the Locked On family. Because, guys, it's that time of year. The college football playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever. Even though they don't have our Canes, which I'm sad about, I'm still going to be watching. We're bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st. It's coming up, guys, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, which is SMU battling Penn State. That's going to be a great game at noon on that day. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. And they do awesome coverage on those networks, by the way. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Bill Belichick has hired Mike Lombardi, who has had many different executive roles in the NFL over the years, including, working for Belichick in New England around 2014 to 2016. Lombardi's been around the block. He's also worked in media at times. I did look up his full resume. He did have a brief stop working in college as a recruiting guy, but it was way back in the early 1980s at UNLV. So Lombardi's been out of the college game for a very, very long time. Now, he was interviewed by Mad Dog Russo on Sirius XM, and Lombardi was asked to run down the responsibilities of his new job at UNC. He says, that job will entail player evaluations, developing a grading system, building a team around what you want to become. That's so important. In college, you have all these first-round picks. Well, you still got to build a team. I mean, Mario Cristobal has been wonderful in recruiting, but they haven't been able to get to the final 12. You got to build a full team. It's not about winning the recruiting battle. It's about making the team the best it can be. So for me, that's the job. So it's funny, he goes out of his way to mention Mario Cristobal. From the Miami side of it, we have to own it. Obviously, we missed out on the top 12 this year. We probably should have been in, but this Michael Lombardi, Rudy, he's already turning up these rivalry buttons 3 days on the job.
Here's what I'm wondering, because if you remember Bill Belichick in New England, he hated any type of bulletin board material. He hated anything where any player, any member, you never heard his staff say anything. So it makes me wonder if Michael Lombardi is going to start doing this. Miami might be the least of his problems. It might be getting called into Bill's office and saying, what are we doing here? Do your job. Just do your job. Why are you going to give them more motivation to go after us? And granted, I don't think North Carolina's on Miami's schedule for a while, but this is not something that's very, Belichick friendly in terms of how he operates his organization. So it's one thing to take shots at Mario Cristobal about that. If you're Mario Cristobal and you're Miami, like you already alluded to Dennis Smith already, coming to the defense, being like our most active Twitter guy and saying, you're taking shots in the wrong place, buddy. We're about your program because it's not looking good from what you've inherited over there in Chapel Hill. I know you guys are great NFL people, but how many of these, TV GMs really do well in terms of their role? Not many that I know of. The thing for me is if you're Mario and you're this staff, this is another sign for you. You don't have to be so friendly with your opposition, because now that you've had some collusion between Syracuse and Clemson and other people trying to, keep you out of the college football playoff, here's another bulletin board for you. Never mind Miami's talent, but your coaching staff to say, okay, we'll take off the gloves and we'll go after everybody too. But, don't hold back anymore. I think as you've seen other coaches and how they're successful in college football, like, Steve Sarkisian and Texas are in the playoffs. They made it the SEC championship game, their first year in the SEC. Say what you want about how down the SEC was this year, but they have no problem taking shots at people. They have no problem calling sideline reporters saying, hopefully they call Georgia for a hold in this half, because they do it every down. Kirby Smart takes everything and makes it us against the world at Georgia. Your league is always against us. Doesn't matter how false it is. Him going after the SEC commissioner after winning the conference championship, saying something like, well, you have us going on the road playing everybody. You played 8 games in the state of Georgia, Kirby. Oh, you had to go on the road against Alabama. Cool, you got them in a down year. Oh, you had to go on the road against, Texas A&M, whatever it was. Like, okay, cool. You're the biggest down year and you lose 2 games, 3 games, you still make it to the conference championship game. So this is Miami's opportunity to say, okay, we're bringing, attitude back to the players. Bring attitude back to the coaches. Jimmy, everybody was an enemy to Jimmy. Everybody was an enemy to Butch.
Michael Lombardi and Bill Belichick, they better hope that everything people say about what college football is becoming is true, because people like to think it's just becoming transactional now. It's just about how much money you're offering. It's no longer about building. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we've gotten to that spot completely yet. I know it looks that way now that we have NIL components and millions of dollars at stake, but Lombardi and Belichick better hope it's that way now, because here's the thing. Like, Lombardi's criticizing Mario Cristobal for, he's praising his ability to bring in highly rated players, but he's taken a shot at Cristobal's ability to actually identify the talent and the fits. And obviously Lombardi and Belichick being in the NFL for the past several decades, that's the science of building a roster. The science of building a roster is, identifying scheme fits, finding diamonds in the rough, all that stuff. But we have no evidence that Belichick and Lombardi, Belichick's never worked in college. Lombardi had to stop, before I was born in the early 90s. I was born in 1984. He was working for UNLV in 1981. Do these guys know the art of building a roster? Because the science, that's the stuff that's in the NFL. In the NFL, you're drafting players. They don't have a choice to come to you. You're offering free agent deals and all that. That's the science of building a roster. How are Belichick and company going to do? And, hopefully he has college people on his staff once he's done building his staff, but he's going to add a lot of NFL people when it comes to actually nurturing relationships with high school players and their families. When it comes to, and in Belichick's case, it's going to be hilarious when he's got to realize that, you're going into the homes of 5-star players. They've got more leverage than you do. And these guys, is Belichick ready to be humbled by a 5-star 17-year-old player who's got all the power, whether he decides to play at UNC or not? That's the art of recruiting. You can question Mario Cristobal on the science of it, but in the art of it, he is Van Gogh when it comes to that recruiting. Can Belichick and Lombardi, can they actually do that stuff? Because they're coming in thinking, we can do this exactly like the NFL. And since, I'm not even going to say Lombardi was great in the NFL. Belichick obviously had success. That we can run this like an NFL franchise. We're going to find out, Rudy, if that can be done or not.
Let's see how Bill O'Brien's doing with that over at Boston College. And then if you look also when it comes to Bill Belichick, the argument is that he's not going to be going into all of these living rooms and having to talk to parents and talking to these, kids who are 5-star recruits. The thought is that he's going to have staff around him to do most of that recruiting. Okay, well, if your GM is Mike Lombardi, is he the guy that's going to be going into, that living room and having that talk? Because if you talk to parents and if you're Mario Cristobal, I'm thinking, oh, this is a suit. This is a guy that's talking on TV that plays one, that plays one for ESPN and goes on Pat McAfee's show. Is he the guy that actually can turn somebody around in that living room? There is an art to that. There is a relationship aspect to that. Look at any other team in the country, the ones that do it well and the ones that don't do it well. And that's where they're suffering. So unless Bill Belichick thinks he can just build a team through the transfer portal every single year, well, we already have a team in the ACC that has shown you that you can't do that. There's a team in the SEC now that shows you can't do that. There's a team in the newly formed Big Ten out west that shows you might hit it one year, but you also had 2 duds in terms of building your entire roster through the portal. Okay, good luck. I mean, it's a different game, and who knows? He said this is a possibly 5-year deal or a 3-year deal. Who says Bill stays around that long? Because as much as there's other nepotism aspects here at play outside of just Mike Lombardi.
I could just picture Belichick texting with 17-year-olds and his responses, "Are you coming or not?"
It's full punctuation. It's like,
yeah.
hey, I don't do this. All right. And the other thing I thought was interesting, like, now that there's so many different podcasts out there with guys like Julian Edelman and, Rob Gronkowski goes on there and they get all these former Patriot executive, either like analysts or assistant coaches. And they're all talking about like, what was it like behind the scenes? There was one episode where they were talking about like all of the logistics involved of creating like Bill's office on the road, where it's like you have this big conference room and how they have to have everything laid out the exact way. And there's like a treadmill over here and there's this piece over here. Are you going to be spending that money in college to bring this like road show of stuff to recreate the office? Because when you have Bob Kraft money and the Patriots, that's one thing. But like to do that at UNC, that you're already investing tens of millions of dollars more into what that program has been doing, in its entire history. I wonder how that stuff is going to play if the results are not there immediately.
Man, well, I feel like we got to bring Rudy back on soon because there's more stuff we want to talk about on another date. Like ticket prices, unfortunately, going way up for Miami fans. Did Nevin Shapiro just get pardoned? Did that happen, or his sentence got commuted? Like
his sentence got commuted
forever.
Yeah, his sentence got commuted. So he's still guilty. He's still a lying piece of trash. He still says things that aren't true by any means. And we can deep dive into this because I was still working at Channel 7 the night that the Yahoo Sports story kind of dropped. So I remember reading all of this junk. And because we were at Miami during the height of those years that all these issues happened, I went straight to the news director and to the sports department. I was like, I just read this. I could tell you verbatim that like maybe 5% of this is true at all. That's how bad all these allegations were. So yeah, look, just because he's now a free man doesn't tell me he's coming around the program anytime soon. But the idea that he's getting paid for appearances to go talk on college football podcasts, that's like, I don't know. That's like me ending up on a podcast about like nuclear proliferation and saying that I'm an expert in terms of nuclear weapons. Like, I'm not, but hey, I'll talk out of my backside too.
Oh man, well, we appreciate your time as always. You want to follow Rudy on X at Rudy Tomarchio. Follow us at Locked On Canes, and we will talk to you again. Just so you guys know, I wanted to make sure to do a Sunday episode today because I don't think I'm going to be able to do a Monday episode until the late afternoon. So we will have a Monday episode. We're going to make you wait until the PM for that one, though. We'll talk to you guys next time on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.